Hello and welcome to Movie Marathon Mood. It's the show where we watch a bunch of movies and then we talk about them. It's as simple as that. On this episode, part four, for our look into the film career of Mel Brooks. But it's the first of these parts that does not feature Brooks in a key role. It's the beginning of his production company, Brooksfilms, with Anne Bancroft's Fatso and the loosely made Loose Shoes. It's a lot to talk about, and it's all right here on Movie Marathon Mood, which starts right now. Hi, I'm Jesse Gilstrap. Both of this episode's movies are ones that I hadn't seen before preparing for this recording. I'd heard of Fatso before and had not really heard of Loose Shoes, but I really had no idea what I was in for either way. Brooks Films as a company began releasing movies in 1980, following Brooks's highly successful 1970s. His success had given him the ability to start his own company and to support all kinds of different projects. The roster is impressive and part of my reason for wanting to do this review series, but it begins here. The first film from Brooks Films is hardly a surprise. It's the first and only feature from Brooks's wife, Anne Bancroft. Bancroft was already a big star. She was nominated for multiple acting Oscars and she won for The Miracle Worker. After all of her own success, it stands to reason that she might give writing and directing a shot, which she does here with Fatso. As a debut feature, this is an interesting choice, but it showcases her Italian upbringing in the Bronx, Bancroft's parents having been immigrants from Italy. There's a definite authenticity in the livelihood of these characters and this family, but that isn't even the focus. That is simply in the detail. The focus is on Dominique, played by Dom DeLuise. DeLuise had been in several prior Brooks projects and undoubtedly made a connection with Bancroft. While DeLuise is certainly known for his incredible comedic spirit, Bancroft wanted to tap into something deeper. Fatso is still in part a comedy, but it's also a drama, and DeLuise gives an excellent performance here in a part that was written for him by Bancroft. There's no question that Bancroft designed this movie in part as an act of empathy to her fellow actor. She loved Eloise so much that she wanted to give him a dramatic showcase. He handles himself so well as funny and serious that the drive to showcase that range makes sense. Dominique is a guy who's obese, has been that way throughout his life. The opening of the film is a montage showing him eating as he grew up, his mom always comforting him with food. It's a crutch for him, but when his cousin dies young of obesity, it prompts Dominique's sister to really push him to make better choices for his own health. That sister is played by Bancroft herself, and she said that had she known she'd be directing the film, she'd have written herself a smaller part. I'm sure the whole process was new, overwhelming, but she is, of course, good in the film, upset at her brother, but loving him just the same. The problem with the film is a matter of tone. I don't believe that Bancroft knew how to treat the film tonally. She only wrote and directed this one film. While there are authentic aspects of the film that I like, there's a lot of messiness too. It's possible that Bancroft should have stuck with it and she could have made something even better. But it's also evident that maybe writing and directing just isn't her style either. She certainly felt that way about it. Had the movie been more successful or if critics had loved it, maybe she would have been compelled to make another movie, but it seems like the whole experience just really wasn't the best for her. There are plenty of movies that successfully navigate the perilous waters between comedy and drama, but Batso is not one of them. A lot of the movie left me wondering what I was supposed to be feeling. Am I supposed to be laughing or crying? There's a scene where Dominique invites over a couple of guys that are in a support group that he joined. And while they are supposed to be there to help Dominique from eating, this group of large men all start discussing food and ultimately tower over Dominique's brother in an effort to reach the food that resides in cabinets that have been locked. This scene, clearly designed to be comic, although it stands out compared to other moments, as when Dominique has eaten all the Chinese food and his sister beats him while he is weeping. This seems like it's meant to be a big dramatic moment, but it's all conflicting. First of all, the beating is done too much in the dark, as if to hide that Bancroft is not really hitting Dominique. It's lazy technique. But also, the idea of him eating food meant for everyone is so exaggerated as to be comic. And here it is treated as a true moment of crisis. Honestly, this is more than a regular eating disorder when eating food meant for others. And Dominique does that throughout the film. It's another level to essentially steal food to eat. This is meant to be balanced, I suppose, by Dominique's overall sweet spirit, but I feel that it's just pushed too far. His sister has reason to be upset by him not just eating too much, but eating what is not even his. So when he gives a big speech about wanting to be loved for who he is and wanting to accept himself too, it falls flat because nobody should have to accept a person that's eating all of their food. Candace Zara of House Calls plays a romantic interest to Dominique. They have a fawning, innocent kind of connection that has them largely making goo goo eyes at each other. Zara is fine, honestly, and I really like her in this. It's nice to see Dom being happy, but it's also weird when she doesn't respond for a while. He fears that she has left him behind, and he starts eating again, only for him to discover that she's not been ignoring him. She's been in the hospital visiting her brother, who has chopped off a finger. The brother apparently is in and out of consciousness, but it's all handled in a strangely selfish way that is, I suppose, for laughs. And yet, at that point in the story, I wanted there to be some serious development. If we're going to have our cake and eat it too, we need to have genuine catharsis. A cheap gag with a guy who cut his finger off, where the romance was never even slightly a risk, does not feel like real dramatic stakes. Ron Carey, meanwhile, who had been in Silent Movie and High Anxiety, plays Dominique's brother. Carey's a terrific comic performer, but I'm unsure on how well the family dynamics work with him in the mix. When Dom starts threatening his brother with a toy gun, it's kind of funny, but when the threat is with a real knife, we're getting quite serious. The tone of these moments is unclear because Dominic seems to have some very serious psychosis at these points, enough that I don't know how genuinely to treat his moments of real emotion. Are we treating this as exaggerated comedy or something more nuanced? Because nuance seems to go out the window at a whole lot of points, and yet the movie seems to be grounded overall in a real world. This is the first feature editing gig for Glenn Farr, who went on to many credits, including winning an Oscar for editing The Right Stuff. Farr's editing here is solid, honestly. Even when I wasn't sure of the tone of the film, the movie never stalled. The editing is one of the things that kept me engaged. The film has a notable credit for its cinematography by Brianne Murphy. Fatso is the first major studio film to be shot by a woman. Pretty crazy for 1980. There still aren't enough opportunities for women in that field, but there are certainly credits now for plenty of women who have done stellar work since. Murphy mostly worked in television and only shot one other feature film, 1994's To Die to Sleep. And I have to say, I don't think Fatso looks especially good. Bancroft had no prior experience as a director, and Murphy had no experience doing a feature film, and that probably didn't help matters. But the tonal issues of the film are certainly not helped by the cinematography. The film is frequently claustrophobic. It also feels like it doesn't always know what to shoot or how to shoot it. There isn't a full sense of shot selection where any given shot seems to have been done for its own purpose as opposed to shots being done to be part of a sequence. Nothing seems to be deeply considered, and I suppose blame in that regard could be shared between Bancroft and Murphy, at least to some degree. I would have to see more work from Murphy to gauge her skills as a cinematographer, but being the first woman to shoot a feature probably wasn't setting her up for success. I'm reminded, though, of Mel Brooks's first two films, where he didn't have the best relationships with some of his key crew. That didn't help him, and it might have helped Bancroft to work with someone more seasoned to balance her lack of experience. Ideally, a cinematographer that she already had a relationship with, of whom there could have been many because of all the movies that Bancroft had made. Ultimately, though, Bancroft didn't want to direct again. Maybe she truly just didn't feel like it was her thing, or the specific process beat her down. Either way, the end result is a mixed bag. It isn't without something genuine to say. There's a feeling of a believable culture, and the acting itself is top notch. Obesity is a real issue for sure, and something that should be helped, even if this film's handling of it as a comedy or drama can be confusing. I do nonetheless believe Bancroft has empathy in her desire to tell this story and to cut at a real dramatic performance from DeLuise. I would give the film a solid C. It's not good, it's also not really bad. It falls in the middle, a mishmash of possibilities. What does not fall in the middle, though, is Loose Shoes. This is a spectacular film. I'm truly still pondering this movie ever since I finished it, and I don't think it will leave my mind anytime soon. I can't think of a parody film that more thoroughly remained unfunny from start to finish. It's incredible. It's incredible how not a single good joke seems to happen, no matter how many jokes are told. It's one of the most pedantic, lazy, ludicrous films I've ever seen. When I finished it, I sat there in awe, wondering how in the world I was even going to talk about this movie. Where to start? A bit of history first, because I was wondering where Brooksfilms became involved. And it turns out that my initial instincts appear to have been correct, that Brooks did not produce the film from the beginning. It was first called Coming Attractions in 1978, and a newspaper ad from that year mentions that it is a Movies is Magic production. Then Bill Murray became a bigger star, breaking out at Saturday Night Live, and he was in Meatballs in 1979. The same year the film came out as Loose Shoes, 1980, Murray was also in Caddyshack, Stripes, Where the Buffalo Roam. That last film, not such a big hit, but it shows that Murray was everywhere, starting to branch out and immediately becoming a movie star. Several players behind Loose Shoes are affiliated with Mel Brooks. Specifically, though, director and co writer Ira Miller had smaller parts in High Anxiety and Blazing Saddles. Fellow writers Ian Fraser and Varley Smith both worked on TV's Rhoda, while Royce Applegate wrote on TV's Welcome Back, Kotter. None of them seem to have many big credits for writing, and it shows throughout this movie, which is a compilation of fake movie trailers. For the record, Bill Murray is barely in the movie. He's in one segment, and it's called Three Chairs for Lefty. He plays Lefty, a prison inmate that we are told is studying the law so that he can get out of prison, but too bad he killed a judge. I guess that's supposed to be a joke about how he's never going to get out and is therefore wasting his time. But then he's informed of a tunnel to escape the prison, but is never told where the tunnel is. And he loudly asks where the tunnel is in front of the guards, because nothing matters in this movie. But I guess he's a hit with everyone, and he's given a piece of meat to take with him to the electric chair. Awesome. Such wit. So glad to see Bill Murray in a trash movie. There were only two segments that I felt were even remotely interesting, one of which verges on being good. This sort of good segment is the last one in the film, called Dark Town After Dark. It certainly does not start out good, suggesting a world where everything is brown, shot in sepia tone in a world of black people, but it's mostly a musical number. The song isn't the most brilliantly written or substantially comic piece of music I've heard, but it's solid, and it's actually amusingly satirical. The title, Loose Shoes, actually comes from this segment, which is inspired by Gerald Ford's ag secretary, who is forced to resign after being quoted saying, "I'll tell you what the coloreds want. It's three things. First, a tight pussy. Second, loose shoes. And third, a warm place to shit." This certainly brings me back to a time when a quote like that would force a political figure to resign. Now, it would likely get them promoted or reelected. Regardless, the song directly quotes the disgraced Earl Butz and essentially is set in an imagined world where that could actually be true. It actually qualifies as satire. Even if it isn't amazing, it's actually okay. The second and last of the segments that I even found remotely interesting is called A Visit with Ma and Pa. It's a parody of the Ma and Pa Kettle films that were released between 1947 and 1957. Make no mistake, this segment has the same horrible writing as much of the rest of the film. The Pa character suddenly realizes that their pig can speak. The pig is rude, but somehow has a connection in New York that can bring them a lot of money, since he's a talking pig and all. But how does the pig have a connection in New York? How did the pig even end up with Ma and Pa? Why am I asking so many questions of this movie? But the pig also ends up mocking a hotel detective trying to get rid of Ma and Paul for having a pig in the room. The pig only talks to the detective at first when the detective has his back turned. Hardy har har. But then the detective finally hears the pig talking, and I start missing Michigan J. Frog. So you might be wondering what I found interesting about this segment at all. The answer is simple, and it's the actor playing Paul, Walker Edmiston. He has a lot of credits, especially voice credits. He was in Get Smart, but he was also the uncredited voice of Mr. Slugworth in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. When I saw that credit, I realized where I recognized his voice. But Edmiston has an energy that almost saves the entire sketch. It's like he realizes that the lines themselves aren't that funny, but he has an anti comedy edge that is so bizarre and watchable. That self aware, surreal intensity helps the movie, where most of the time the acting is flat out awful. There are moments that feel like outtakes, but I suppose they couldn't be bothered to film a good take, as in a Charlie Chaplin parody where a man wants to hide in a woman's skirt and the woman laughs and seems to look at the camera, while the man doesn't get anywhere close to actually hiding. Bad jokes, poorly executed. That's what you get in Loose Shoes. Let's run through the segment, shall we? The Howard Hughes story, meant to be a parody of Howard Hughes, because Hughes kind of went mental at the end, and there's a joke about him loving to watch planes have sex with a shot of them refueling in midair, which, okay. Dr. Strangelove actually had a shot of refueling planes that felt sexual in a way that actually had humor in it. It never outright says that the planes are having sex or that anyone is getting off on it, because that's weird and not funny. Then Skateboarders from Hell, which is about thugs that ride around on skateboards, which is nice and pathetic. Invasion of the Penis Snatchers is about aliens that apparently arrived just to steal men's penises. There's a line at the end that it's in 3D, so I guess the idea of penises being snatched in 3D is supposed to be funny. There's a Woody Allen parody called The Sneaker, where some sort of Allen impersonator mistakes a man for Clark Gable. The Magic and the Mystery of the Gobi, where the joke is that they have a resort in the Gobi Desert, but it's actually desolate and unforgiving. For some reason, the film then goes to intermission, where Buddy Hackett promotes a charity for bedwetting children called Stop It, where a supposed rehab facility has workers harassing children that wet themselves. I hope you're realizing how hilarious this movie is. Then the movie implores theater patrons to go get snacks if they're high and they want some munchies, and there's a promotion for the theater for parents to leave their kids at the theater for 50 hours on the weekends, and I honestly don't know what angle the joke is supposed to be from. The Shaggy Studio Chief, and the calf who thought she was a chicken, which is just a shot of a calf getting up and revealing that it's sitting on some eggs. The Birth of a Nation, which has various types of people from American history coming out from a woman's legs raised in stirrups, before eventually revealing a Charlie Chaplin type character, where everyone calls him a commie Jew. Scuffed Shoes, where a prima ballerina is dead, so a man steps in her place and is shot and killed. Just a Run in the Sun, a war story, and A Fistful of Something that features Sid Haig as the stranger, who rolls into town into a spaghetti western story that has mafia undertones, which could be a joke, I guess, about spaghetti westerns being shot in Italy. I did like seeing Sid Haig, known for many great parts, who had been in Foxy Brown and Get Smart, among many credits. But it's not like he gets anything compelling to do, even if he gets to roll into a western town and overall just look cool. Welcome to Bacon County is supposed to be funny because the town a black man and a white woman end up in somehow is not racist or sexist. but it somehow manages to still feel oppressive, is when a man comes into a motel room unannounced and flirts with a woman who is supposedly named Boobies. This segment also had Ed Lauder as the sheriff. It makes me really want to watch something good that has Lauder in it, since we last talked about him on this channel when he was in the legendarily bad X Files episode entitled Space. Lauder deserves better recognition on here. That's Sexploitation, which is a very short animated compilation of bad sex parodies. The return of the Pom Pom Boys, with its jokes about whether this group of male cheerleaders know how to have sex. Cool. Billy Jerk Goes to Oz, where a jerk of a guy goes to Oz, but is rude to everyone, including tearing apart the Scarecrow for calling a midget shorty. The fake trailer promises that Billy Jerk will get on your nerves, and since this all happens before the last segment of the film, they were right. He got on my nerves. The whole film had by that point. The film was shot by Jack Beckett, he of films like Booby Trap. It's a lazy, cheaply made film, so I can't blame Beckett wholesale for the way the film looks. But frankly, it's not horribly shot in places. It was the first major editing job for Alan Balsam, who was an assistant editor on Fatso, and later would edit Better Off Dead and Revenge of the Nerds. I guess that Balsam does an okay job, really, considering what he had to work with, but that's exactly the point. Since the film is only 69 minutes long in its current streaming incarnation, and yet it still feels long. Almost every segment feels long because nothing interesting or funny is happening on screen. I was, in a way, interested in how bad it was, lost in a comedy desert, desperately thirsty for anything compelling to happen. The very few bright spots far from save the film, but I do think this movie manages to not be an F. An F grade is such a specialized thing, something that is offensively awful. This movie is too cheap, too slight, too bland to fully be an F grade, and there are tiny, microscopic positives, so I would ultimately give the film a D minus. By no means do I recommend it. I hope that's obvious. I don't recommend it to anyone besides the most intensely curious of people. If you walk in understanding from the jump that it's not a good time, and it's not even so bad it's good either, it's just bad. That being said, whew, I am really excited for the next episode. Part 5 of Mel Brooks takes us to a fascinating double feature, one film that is a serious dramatic film, the second being a wild bit of sketch comedy. We'll be talking about David Lynch's The Elephant Man, followed by Mel Brooks's History of the World Part 1. I will go ahead and say here that History of the World Part 1 ends with a series of coming attractions that might owe something to loose shoes, which is bizarre. That segment of History of the World is so good, so classic and hilarious that it somehow is currently being worked on as a new Brooks series for Hulu. That anything positive came from Loose Shoes is a miracle. Or perhaps you could say that it was Brooks wanting to showcase how to actually make a funny roster of fake trailers. Regardless, The Elephant Man and History of the World Part 1 are films that I have long loved for different reasons, and I'm excited to revisit them, especially after this episode. And I'll discuss them here on the next episode of Movie Marathon Mood. Thanks for watching.